Okay, skill in sport part 2 of the skill classification. So we left off at this point, okay, where sort of introduced the continuum. So we'll crack on with these, all right. And again, this links directly to your assessment. So in terms of some of the ways we can classify these, all right, simple and complex, all right. So these are classified according to the number of judgments and decisions that need to be made in order to perform the skill. Okay. Now, sort of inherent into that, so the more decisions that need to be made regarding the skill, the more complex that skill would be. Okay. The less decisions, obviously, the more simple that it would be. Okay. Now, experts within the field would probably argue that that's not a simple skill, but generally, complex skills we learn in stages. Okay. Because they require more decisions. Okay. And simple skills generally we can learn as a whole because they require less capacity of sort of cognitive thought and cognitive processing. Okay, so that is our first continuum. And again, depending on the scale that you choose, obviously you can determine where you think it sits on that continuum, and obviously justify as well as to why. Okay, the next continuum is environmental, and this refers to open and closed. And effectively what this means is to the effect of which the environment has an impact, okay, on the skill. Now, if the environment has an impact on the skill, it's considered an open skill. Okay, so this would be affected by the environment. So movements have to be adapted to the environment, and generally, and we'll talk about what this means in a second, they are externally paced. Alright, which means that in order to perform the skill effectively, it is impacted by the environment, and our movements do have to be adapted to the environment. So, for example, passing a ball in football. Okay, if you don't pass it at the right time, at the right sort of trajectory, speed, okay, then it's not going to be an effective outcome. So you have to adapt your movements to what the environment is telling you. Now, a closed skill is where we consider not to be affected by the environment. Okay, so movements follow a set pattern, alright, and have a definite beginning and end, and this generally internally paced. And again, we'll talk about what that means in a second. However, in terms of a free throw in basketball, alright, again, quite consistent. Now, remember, these are sort of continuums. So I know some of you are not sure the skill that you've chosen, whether they're open or closed. Alright, but just you need to consider where it might sit on the continuum. Is it more one than the other? So, for example, sort of like a golf swing. You know, is that open? Is that closed? Alright, there is some impact from the environment because you've got things like wind, sort of weather conditions, lay of the land. But at the same time, it is internally paced. Okay, and they do follow a set pattern, so it's probably more closed than it is open. However, there does need to be acknowledgement of the wider environment whilst you're playing your shot. Okay, so in terms of pacing, so we'll kind of go on externally and internally paced and what they mean. And like I said, they're often used in conjunction with the continuum that we just referred to. And this is all about the timing of the movement. So a self-paced is where the performer controls the rate at which the skill is executed. Alright, these are normally closed skills, so they're not affected by the environment. The athlete controls how fast and the rate at which they perform the skill. And then you've got externally paced. The environment controls the rate of performing the skill. This involves sort of reaction, usually open. So what we can see here is that externally paced are determined by the environment. So, for example, the shuttlecock, depending on the flight and the speed that individual is receiving the shuttlecock, will ultimately determine when they perform the skill. Whereas our javelin throw, for example, this is more self-paced, which means that they're in control of the rate at which they perform it. Yes, there's sort of a clock, but they control the rate at which they perform the skill. If a badminton player were to do that, for example, the shuttlecock might hit the floor. Alright, so they have to respond. It's externally paced. They have to respond to what is happening in the environment. And again, in terms of relating that to your skill, Alright, just consider where it might sit on the continuum. Okay, a lot of game sort of sports will be externally paced. Alright, just as a little bit of a heads up, and they generally are sort of open skills because they are impacted by the environment. Alright, not all, but a lot of the skills that we use in sport are. So in terms of muscular involvements, the next continuum, this can be kind of considered as gross or fine. We should be sort of familiar with these terms. And this is concerned with the precision of the movement. Alright, so the less precise, shall we say, the movement, we would consider that to be a gross skill, and this is where sort of large muscles are recruited. Alright, and they're involved in it. It doesn't have to be that refined or precise. And interestingly may include many fundamental movement patterns. Okay, so in terms of large muscle involvement and not being very precise, so perhaps more of our power-based sports. Alright, there is obviously a technique to it, okay, and athletes within that sort of domain may argue, but in terms of classifying it, it is a gross skill. It does involve large recruitments of large muscle mass, okay, and muscle types as well. Whereas fine motor skill, this is where it's more intricate, more precise, more refined, and they use perhaps smaller muscle groups. Okay, and perhaps generally a higher degree of hand-eye coordination. Okay, so you can kind of make up your own mind there of what is fine and what is gross. And then generally, like I said, in most game sports, you'd probably find that a lot are gross skills, but there may be elements of fine classification within there as well. Okay, if you're thinking things like, kicking a goal, or I don't know, penalty kick, then there are elements of fine motor control, okay, as well as gross. So again, consider where you put it on the continuum. Alright, and just being able to make sure that you can justify why you're putting it where it lies on the continuum. Okay, so one of the last ones to go through is around the continuity. So 3 different types of in terms of the continuum where we can put it on. Alright, this is to do with how clear the beginning and end of the scale are. Okay, so discrete scales are where there's a clear beginning and end. Alright, now the scale can be repeated, but it has to start again. So for example, we have a penalty shot. Alright, we know exactly where the beginning and the end are of this penalty shot taking place. But in order for it to replicate that, she would have to sort of start again. So there's a clear beginning and end. So this would be considered a discrete skill. Okay. We then have serial. So this is several discrete elements. So things like a triple jump. Alright, put together to make an integrated movement or sequence of movement. Alright, so we perhaps learn elements in phases. And it's numerous discrete skills put into sort of one sequence, which makes it a serial. And then you've got continuous, where there's no obvious sort of beginning or end. The end of one cycle sort of initiates the start of the other. So generally things like cycling and perhaps long distance running we may consider here. A lot of sort of skills within a lot of team sports might be considered to be discrete. Alright, whether it be catching, passing, sort of tackling, because you can see where the skill starts, where the skill ends, but depending on what context you're talking about, it will ultimately determine how you classify on the continuity continuum what sort of skill yours is, whether it be discrete, whether it be serial, and whether it be continuous. Alright, so again, being able to link it, justify why you've put it in that place on the continuum. Okay, and lastly is around organization. So this is to do with the type of skill or how a skill is organized, alright, to be effective. So high organization is where the skill has elements or subroutines that are difficult to separate. Okay, so generally probably more linked with a continuous type of skill. And low organization, skills that are split into subroutines that are easily identified as separate movements. Okay, and again, you could probably link that to more serial skills. Okay, because they are several discrete elements put into one, and you can learn learn those into subroutines. Okay, so hopefully you can start to see how some of the continuums link and almost complement each other. All right, and that'll be quite important for your assessment. All right, now you were given the task right back at the start of the module to do this. Okay, but effectively what you're doing is you're plotting one where you think they are on the continuum. Alright, but the important thing is the explanation and the justification. So in terms of where this whole thing sits in your assignment, you do have to fully classify your skill. So whatever your skill was, whether it be a sort of a hooker throw, golf swing, a football free kick, whatever that may be, you have to fully classify it. And what I mean by fully classifying is that you put it on each of the continuums where you think it lies in terms of is it down the one extreme, is it down the other, or sort of does it sit in the middle, more towards one or more towards the other? So you need to sort of decide that. But you need to explain and justify it, and the way you do that is you do that in relation to perhaps some literature. Okay, now I'll show you kind of where you can access that in a second, but you need to fully classify a skill, and the important part is the explanation and justification. Okay, that sits in terms of your assignment. That sits in this part here. Okay, so your part 1, a chosen skill that is fully classified. So the first thing you do in your assessment is classify that skill. Alright, and you tell me why you classified it in the way that you have. So a little bit more information where you can get that from. Okay, is if I go to Blackboard for you. So the excuse me, the Honeyborn 2006, where I reference a fair bit in that PowerPoint, is actually on Blackboard for you. Okay, so I'll show you where that is at the second, so you can access that. But it is a good place. So when I say explain and justify, all right, it's one of the, and it's not the only source you can use. Obviously, I want you to use more in terms of sort of higher criteria. That 70% plus. It's looking at resources beyond that taught, so academic literature beyond on that taught. So if you look beyond what I'm giving you, all right, you're setting yourself up really nicely. So if you go to your Blackboard, okay, you go to skill in sport. What you'll notice there, you've got additional reading. So in the additional reading, I've already put the chapter for your to help you with your classification. So when you open it up, what you will see, okay, is some of the stuff we've obviously gone through, different types of skill, cognitive, perceptual, and then obviously we can keep going. And what you will notice is where the continuum sit. Alright, there's a bit more information there around classifying each of the skill, and your justification and explanation. Alright, you can use literature to support why you classify it in the way that you are. Alright, and that will link to perhaps some of the elements that are within this chapter here. Okay, so hopefully that's helped a little bit. Okay, what I'm going to do for the next screencast is I'll move on to sort of stages of learning, performance curves, and some of the theories of learning as well. And again, identify perhaps where that sits in. The Honeyborn reference is there for you. Okay, so if you're going to use that in your assessment, the chapters that I've just signposted you to, that is the reference there. But there's obviously some other ones you could have a look at as well. Okay, that you can access through Oxford Brookes online. Okay, so make sure that you look at them. All right, any questions, guys? All right, please let me know.